In the harsh winter of 1940, a massive force of 20 Soviet divisions crossed into the dark northern wilderness of Finland. Command expected a swift, crushing victory. They deliberately modeled their approach on the blitzkrieg tactics that the German military had used against Poland just months earlier. To achieve this speed, the Soviets relied heavily on mechanized power. As this photograph shows, their invasion force was built around a dense column of tanks and motorized troops designed to overwhelm the opposition. Planners held deep contempt for the simple defense methods of the much smaller Finnish army, trusting entirely in the sheer weight of their modern machinery. But this reliance on heavy industrialized warfare blinded them to their environment. They were marching an immense, rigid machine into a devastating natural trap. The mechanized assaults of the Blitzkrieg were engineered for the wide, flat plains of Central Europe. They were completely unsuited for the dense, frozen forests of the Arctic Circle. Soviet leadership advanced with a staggering ignorance of the actual conditions on the ground. Which raises a question that still echoes in military history. How does a modernized, industrialized military machine get completely dismantled by a vastly outnumbered force? The campaign began with an exhausting march. Soviet infantry covered over 200 miles on foot from the last railhead at Murmansk into the Finnish wilderness. They expected to drive their tanks and supply trucks down established roads, but instead encountered snowdrifts up to 10 feet deep. The deep snow created a geographical anomaly. Insulated by the snow, the earth beneath remained warm and swampy. Troops and vehicles sank straight through into a hideous slime. Then, as temperatures plummeted at night, the mud froze solid, encasing boots and wheels in ice. To move a single vehicle forward, the Soviets had to send groups of up to 200 infantrymen trudging ahead in heavy boots just to flatten the snow. This reduced the advance to a crawl. A single Soviet division could stretch between 20 and 25 miles long, turning the entire column into an unmanageable logistical bottleneck. The Finnish winter inverted the standard logic of warfare. The massive size of the Soviet army became a fatal liability rather than a strategic advantage. The extreme cold caused their mechanized doctrine to fail completely. As we see in this image of abandoned equipment, modern weapons, tanks, and transport trucks were rendered utterly useless, frozen in place along the roads. In stark contrast stood the individual Finnish fighter, a soldier operating with a deep practical understanding of this harsh environment. This photograph highlights the specialized equipment that gave the Finns superiority. They relied on lightweight skis for rapid mobility and white camouflage to blend into the snowscapes. Moving quickly and invisibly through the forests, the Finns used simple incendiary devices, like Molotov cocktails, to destroy the immobilized, multi-ton Soviet vehicles. In extreme environments, localized adaptation and tactical simplicity will rapidly neutralize rigid technological superiority. The weather collapsed Soviet supply lines. Food rations became far heavier, overburdening the transport network. Medical services failed completely, and wounded soldiers froze to death. The biological effects of the cold were severe. Temperatures were so low that one Finnish soldier, shot 6 times through the chest, was able to keep walking to a medical station simply because he bled so slowly. While the Finns wore multiple layers of insulated clothing, the Soviet troops were issued standard tunics that offered almost zero protection against the Arctic freeze. Many lacked tents and were forced to dig makeshift shelters in the icy ground. This image of a Soviet official illustrates another fatal flaw, a rigid ideological command structure. Political commissars embedded with the troops regularly overruled military officers and issued strict orders that no unit was allowed to surrender, regardless of their position. Soldiers were told that if they surrendered, their families back in Russia would suffer, and they themselves would face torture by the Finns. Trapped by the cold and their own leadership, many Soviet soldiers and officers chose suicide. A rigid ideological command structure destroys an army's morale from within, especially when soldiers are forced to fight the elements alongside the enemy. The outcome of the campaign was humiliating for the invaders. The massive Soviet force suffered immense, costly losses against a defending army a fraction of their size. The material consequences were equally severe. Most of the modern Soviet weapons functioned so poorly during the Winter Campaign that they had to be completely recalled and redesigned. The physical reality of the Arctic Circle completely shattered the theoretical doctrine of a mechanized blitzkrieg. The root cause of this disaster was a staggering lack of forward reconnaissance and intelligence gathering prior to the invasion. Any military operation must be based on accurate intelligence to prevent the environment from surprising the attackers. As this image of a blocked road and disabled vehicles shows, the failure to reconnoiter the terrain stalled the entire advance. By ignoring the physical nature of the land and entirely underestimating their enemy, the Soviet command suffered a fatal self-inflicted wound. If military might is blinding, when does an absolute reliance on modern technology become an army's greatest vulnerability?